Hello and oh. There we go. Hello and welcome to Around the Nation here on TYT Nation. I am your host, Jeff Waldorf, and I kind of fucked up at the beginning, but that's okay. Fuck it. We're going to do it live because that's the way we do things around here. I have some really important stories for you tonight. A lot of information. We've got some updates on the West Virginia coal plant, as well as conservative reaction. That should be a lot of fun to go through. We've got basically some new stunning facts about how many rich people there are in Congress. Not a big surprise, but figured I'd go over that with you guys. Then we've got a change on the climate science consensus. It turns out that I am now wrong on that. Fascinating. I'll get into that. And minimum wage and go proud. We're going to get into that. So we've got a lot of great stories for you today, and it's going to be a lot of fun, but a lot of information, so just bear with me on this one. Trust me, it's going to be a good show. We're going to start out with our first story, the coal plant. Smooth transition. Smooth. Working on that. All right. So, now, after 6 days without water, some people in West Virginia are finally actually able to actually use some of their water again after that chemical spill that got into the Elk River. Now, the contamination from the chemical, and I'm probably going to butcher the name, it's 4-methylcyclohexane methanol, or a shorthand way of calling it is MCHM. Now, that actually caused about 14 people to go to the hospital for exposure. Now, thankfully, they're not serious, but when it comes to the long-term effects of exposure to this chemical, we don't exactly know. And that just adds to the list of things that we don't actually know about this chemical. I'll get into that. We're also unsure about the long-lasting environmental damage that this spill will create, especially now that there have been reports of this chemical leaking into the soil. So that's not good. And this is just one of several problems relating to the spill. And the first being, of course, how the fuck were they able to build this plant so close to the water supply? You see, that bothers me right there. That's sort of a big red flag. How could you build a chemical plant like this so close to an important water supply? Now, not only that, but the next question is, or I should say the next concern is, that we don't actually know that much about this chemical. Now, a person named Elizabeth Sharman, of West Virginia's Poison Control Director, she had said about this chemical, MCHM, quote, "We don't know the safety info, how quickly it goes into the air, or even its boiling point." So this is basic information about this chemical that these people don't know about. We don't know the effects. We don't know the long-term effects. And we certainly don't know the environmental effects of exposure to this chemical. Not good. Not good. So basically, we put up a chemical plant with a chemical we don't know very much about next to a major water supply, and somehow that's okay. Somehow nobody was worried about this, especially with the lax oversight that has been proven to exist. Nobody had the slightest idea. Oh yeah, nothing will go wrong. It's not like it's going to leak into the water supply or anything like that. Come on. Always expect the unexpected to happen and guard yourself against that. You should expect problems and take proactive steps to prevent these kind of problems. So, now, one question that kind of looms over this whole issue is, will this make the case for more regulation? Well, let's ask Speaker John Boehner about that and see what he has to say.
We have enough regulations on the books. And what the administration ought to be doing is actually doing their jobs. Why wasn't this plant inspected since 1991? Somebody ought to be held accountable here.
Somebody ought to be held accountable for this. No kidding. And going back to what he said, oh, we've got enough regulation in the books. I see. Oh, that's it. So we have enough regulation. So apparently regulation wouldn't have actually helped, right? Except that no, you were absolutely wrong. We did not have enough regulation. West Virginia law, for example, does not require inspections for chemical storage facilities like this one. Really? So this place was really unregulated because it didn't produce the chemicals. It just stored them. How convenient. And besides, even if they were regulated, and it doesn't mean that they would be inspected on a regular basis. Now, John Boehner had asked, and it's a good question, why this plant hadn't been inspected since 1991. Well, John, that's because of your dumbass. All this deregulation by the Republicans of the industry and the budget cuts have actually made it impossible to inspect all of these plants on a regular basis. Now, for example, some of this deregulation and this defunding has hit the EPA, for example. The EPA just recently had its budget cut by 20%. And the Republicans were bragging about it. Oh, yeah, did you see that? I cut the EPA. Yeah, oh, yeah, I'm awesome. I'm so conservative. I cut the EPA. Oops. Oh, right. Now we had this big chemical spill because the EPA didn't have enough funding. Well, what about OSHA? Now, according to the Huffington Post, due to low pay, the agency has struggled to hire and retain inspectors, resulting in so few workplace inspections that the average site will only face an inspection every 99 years. 99 years. Need an inspection? You got a long line, son. A long line. According to the AP, the Associated Press, quote, OSHA officials had scheduled an inspection of the Freedom Industries facility in 2009, but canceled it because the facility didn't fall under the agency's special emphasis programs. So even though it had, even though it could have, it had an inspection scheduled, because it was not, this industry was not regulated well enough, and the industry, and the regulators didn't have enough money to do inspections, they got away with it. There was no inspection of this plant, and we see exactly what happened, and we see the result of that. Defunding and deregulation caused this disaster. And what's the Republican response? Let's deregulate some more. Get those costly regulations and burdens out of the way, which I'm sure there are definitely some burdensome and costly regulations in place. There is no doubt. But this is not one of them. And look, West Virginia isn't exactly a liberal bastion. Okay? But I hope now they'll actually realize that there is regulation there for a reason. And that not all regulation is bad regulation. And the reason that some of this regulation exists is so that places like Freedom Industries can't actually pollute their water to make an extra buck. Now, there is something else to note before I wrap this up. Is that Speaker Boehner got about $5,000 from Freedom Industries. Follow the money, guys. It's going to lead you to all your answers. Follow the money. Speaking of money, we go into our next story. There's a new report out by the Center for Responsive Politics that shows that over half of all members of Congress had a net worth of over $1 million in 2012. Now, this is the first time, and this is why this is important, because this is the first time in American history that a majority of our lawmakers are millionaires or have been millionaires. First time ever. The median net worth of Congress, for members of Congress, was $1,008,767, according to this report. Do you know what the median net worth of the average American family is? Just under $39,000. The median net worth. African American families fare even worse. You know what their median net worth was in 2012? Just under $5,000. $5,000. The median net worth of the average white family? $110,729. Wow. Now that's a big difference. It's a big difference between, there's a huge racial disparity for one. But what's even more of a disparity is between the members of Congress and their constituents. Now that's what's really important about this. Now, those numbers don't exactly surprise me. And furthermore, what actually doesn't surprise me as well is since Congress is rich, they actually respond more to the priorities of the rich. Now, we actually saw that just recently when Congress decided to let unemployment benefits end. We weren't talking about letting tax breaks for the wealthiest 1% end. No, we're talking about the lifeline that people were hanging on to. We let that end. Now, do you remember the study that was actually published in 2012 that showed that the voting records of senators had actually consistently aligned with the opinions of the wealthiest constituents? The opinions of lower-class constituents, however, actually never even appeared to influence the senators' voting behavior whatsoever. If you're poor, your congressman ain't listening to you. But if you're rich and you give them legal bribes, campaign contributions, then of course they have all the time in the world to listen to you. And look, surprisingly, this isn't even a partisan issue. No. Democrats were not any more responsive to the poor than Republicans. You know why? Because our system is pay to play. Because you have to have a lot of money in order to run for office, which means that you have to find rich corporations or a rich donor and suck up and kiss ass in order to get enough money to win re-election. Remember, 94% of Senate races are determined by the person that has more money. It's pay to play. Now, Thomas Hayes of Trinity University actually wrote this study back in 2012. And he wrote, quote, "My analysis, which examines senator behavior on a large number of votes, shows evidence of responsiveness to only the wealthy, a distinct problem for any democracy. In some ways, this suggests oligarchic tendencies in the American system, a finding echoed in other research." Oligarchic tendencies. Goddamn right. Finally, he writes, although Americans might not easily identify along class lines, this does not mean that politicians representing these citizens do not respond to them in this manner. If equal responsiveness is a fundamental practice in a democratic society, my findings question the degree to which this occurs. This is a fundamental practice of democracy. Listening to everyone equally. Remember, we all have one vote, right? But we still do not have the same influence because we don't have the money. And you look at all these things like Citizens United, Buckley Vallejo, the influence of money in politics, the amount of money it takes to run for office, and you see that unless you're rich, you are not represented. And look, a lot of politicians love to talk about class warfare. And that's, of course, whenever somebody talks about income inequality and when the poor and middle class point out issues where the rich obviously get listened to. They get their tax cuts, special breaks, preferential treatment. And where legislatures don't actually legislate in the way that their constituents actually want. Remember, huge majorities of people do not want Social Security cuts or Medicare cuts. And yet, here we are, President Obama and the Democrats have put Social Security on the table when it comes to budget agreements. An overwhelming majority of people support social programs for the poor. And yet, what do? We continue to see our politicians cut those beneficial programs. Unemployment insurance. Once again, I got to point out how the extensions have ended. No. You're just doing class warfare, guys. Class warfare. God, pointing out how we control the system, that's class warfare. How we get all the breaks and you shouldn't. Class warfare. Class warfare does exist. But it's not the poor that are waging it. Or the middle class. It's actually the wealthiest among us. With its bought members in Congress, who are rich just like they are, they prioritize their wealth and the wealth of their donors above anything else, above any priorities. And look, this is exactly why you need to go to wolf-pack.com. Because unless you're a wealthy individual or a multinational corporation, you will not be represented. And nothing will ever change. We will not win on any issue, no matter how much support you have, until we get the money out of politics. All right, I'm going to take a quick break. I'll be right back. More segments. Welcome back and around the nation. Man, I'm kind of fired up from those stories. Not only that, but I've drank way too much coffee. Which, you know what? There is actually no such thing as too much coffee, just to let you know. So on to our next story, which is equally irritating, I think, because it shows how stupid our Congress is. Stupid and corrupt. Although I am kind of amused by that graphic. So whenever I do a story about climate change, I always love to point out that 97% of climate scientists actually agree that, climate change is real and it's heavily influenced by human activity. Well, it turns out that I was actually wrong. 97% of climate scientists actually don't agree. What? Let me get into it. So, a new study came out, and from November 2012 through December 2013, 2,258 different peer-reviewed climate articles by over 9,000 authors were written and reviewed. Guess how many had actually rejected man-made global warming? Out of all of those studies, 2,258 different peer-reviewed papers. How many rejected man-made climate change? 1. Uno. That's it. 1. So that brings the total number of climate scientists that reject climate change to a shocking 0.1%. 0.01%. So that means 99.99% of climate scientists now agree that climate change is real. I'm still shocked that it's not 100%. I'm pretty sure Coke money had something to do with that one guy. Now, the sad part is that this does not make any sort of difference when it comes to our politics, especially when it comes to Republican politics. Let me explain. Out of the 278 elected Republicans in the House, 160 of them say, what, climate change? Doesn't exist. Liberal fallacy. Oh, they're just trying to tax us. That's it. Yep, they're just trying to tax you guys. That's 58% of all Republicans that are elected in office right now that don't believe in climate change. 130 of those are from the House of Representatives. It's about 56%. 30 senators that are Republican do not believe in climate change. That's 65%. Hey, you know what? Maybe I should be happy that it's not even higher. But nonetheless, these are our elected officials. These are people like Michelle Bachmann, Paul Brown, James Inhofe, very, very famous climate denier. These guys who are in places like the Science Committee making policy that don't believe in climate change. Speaking of some of the committees, 17 out of 22 Republican members of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, or 77%, are climate change deniers. The Science Committee. Fuck, man. Not only that, but 90% of the House Republican leadership, the leaders of the Republicans, don't believe in climate change. They're deniers. But I'm not surprised. 22 out of 30 Republican members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, or 73%, deny climate change. Notice that. The Energy and Commerce Committee. Making our energy policy. I wonder what kind of energy policy that we'll have with these guys. Could it be, I don't know, maybe drill, baby, drill? I'm thinking that's what happened. And finally, 100% of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee Republicans have said that climate change is not happening or that humans do not cause it. Oh, it's just natural. Jesus will take care of it. Jesus. Look, I wouldn't be surprised that if 100% of these climate deniers were also getting bribed by big oil and natural gas and the coal industry lobbyists. And look, it's not just Congress that's the problem. It's also the media. Now, the media is a huge, huge problem. And that's according to some research done by Think Progress. Now, they found that in 2013, climate coverage at 5 of the major newspapers dropped by over 40%. That includes papers such as the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and the LA Times. Now, 40%, a 40% drop. Wow. And remember, we were already at historically low levels of climate coverage. And that's according to the University of Colorado that monitors newspaper coverage of climate change. Now, I've got a rather disastrous chart to show you that will kind of illustrate how bad it is in the media. Oops. There we go. Now look at that. That is historically low. And look, you could just say like, it's print media. Who reads the print media anyway? Well, it's not just print media. It's actually television as well. Now, according to Robert Rule of Drexel University, in 2013, the major networks ABC, NBC, and CBS ran about 30 stories on climate change. Now, let's compare that to 2007, where there was actually 147 segments on climate change on the nightly news. And when the networks actually do talk about climate change, they actually create a false equivalence by bringing on a climate denier and bringing on a scientist, or most of the time not even a scientist. They'll bring on a Republican lawmaker, and they'll sit there and talk about, I don't know, you guys say that 97% of the climate scientists say that climate change exists, and you say that, and the Republican over here says that, well, we don't know. There's a there's no consensus in the scientific community. You decide. No, you don't get to decide on your facts. That is not something you get to decide on. What facts are real and what facts are not. Facts are fucking facts. So you either listen to the facts and make a decision based on it, or you accept that you're a fucking idiot with your fingers in your ears. And that's exactly what it is. And look, it's no wonder that because of our disgraceful media, that people are so mixed about climate change. They don't know what's what. They're confused. Why? Because our politicians and our media fucking lies to them all the time and creates a false equivalence. It's a disgrace. And you know what? I don't blame the people. Okay? No, the blame for this falls squarely on the lap of our politicians and our corporate-controlled, bought media. It's irresponsible and a disgrace. It's just been an angry show today. On to our next story. This one's a little bit better. All right. So the Economic Policy Institute just recently put out a letter from economists that argue in favor of raising the minimum wage. Oh, that's fantastic. Well, by how much? Well, they argue that we should raise the minimum wage to $10.10 by the year 2016 and to slowly kind of phase it in so that it doesn't really affect the markets too much. All right. So what about the economists? How many were they, and what kind of qualifications do they have? Well, there's actually 75 economists, and that includes 7 Nobel laureates. So these guys know economics. They actually know what they're doing. They're not some dude off the street like, I don't know, I think I'm an economist. I can count. No, it's not that kind of guy. And they say, and they argue, that the government should pass a minimum wage law and tie it to inflation. That's a great idea. Now, they write in this letter to the Economic Policy Institute, quote, at a time when persistent high unemployment is putting enormous downward pressure on wages, such a minimum wage increase would provide a much-needed boost to the earnings of low-wage workers. Now, I know what some people watching are going to say. But Jeff, if you raise the minimum wage, that's going to hurt poor people. You're going to shut down jobs. Well, the letter actually addresses that by saying, no, it won't hurt poor people. It's actually going to help poor people. Let me explain. From the letter, quote, research suggests that a minimum wage increase could have a small stimulative effect on the economy as low-wage workers spend their additional earnings, raising demands and job growth and providing some help on the jobs front. In fact, actually, estimates say that raising the minimum wage to $10.10 would help grow the economy by $22 billion, and the demand that it creates will actually help create 85,000 new jobs. Now, that's not bad. So the argument that this will kill jobs is actually ridiculous propaganda. When people actually have money, they're going to spend more. And that money goes back into the economy. Rent, food, gas, clothing. These are not luxury goods. These are goods that people don't just go out and buy in a whim. Okay, people need these things. You have to buy this stuff. And since you have to buy it, money goes right back into the economy. And that helps those businesses that actually sell those items. And here's what happens when you have more demand. You actually have to hire people to actually make and sell those things. Anybody who cannot see that is either blind or an idiot. It's Economics 101. Now, here's what doesn't happen when demand rises. People losing their jobs. Layoffs. Layoffs actually happen when there is low demand, when you're not getting a lot of customers. Companies don't need workers during times of low demand. But when you actually have customers with money to spend, well, holy fucking shit, they're going to come and spend it. And it's going to increase demand, and it's going to lead to hiring more workers to meet that demand. And here's an interesting fact, that it's actually cheaper to hire more people at $10.10 an hour than to actually pay existing staff overtime. It's actually cheaper for companies to do that than to pay time and a half. It makes sense. And studies show that when you raise the wage, there's actually less employee turnover. Why? Well, because they're actually more loyal and happy, and they'll work harder. Studies have proven that. And not only that, but there's a benefit to that. You see, when you have less employee turnover, that actually reduces your training costs as an employer. You don't have to train somebody every week because everybody is quitting in disgust or finding a better job. Saves you money. And more studies show that states that raise the minimum wage during times of high unemployment actually do better. Amazing, right? Couple of examples. Alabama and Tennessee, 2009, they raised their wage. They actually saw 12-month job increases well above the national average. 10% increase in Tennessee's minimum wage saw an increase of employment around 4.5%, higher than the national average. Alabama actually saw a growth of about 4% of jobs. When you raise the wage, there's a good chance that you'll create jobs. It's not always the case. Not always. But generally, that's the trend. There are, of course, always other factors to consider. When you look at the states that actually raised their wages, they saw an average of about 0.5% of employment growth when you average everything out. Not all of them grew, but 21 out of 35 states that raised their minimum wage actually saw more job growth during the time of high unemployment. It makes sense. And look, a lot of states already have higher minimum wages than the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. And here's another thing, too. Here's another thing. See, a lot of people love to point out how, well, you know, we shouldn't raise the minimum wage because it's going to cost companies too much money, right? But I'll get into that. But first I want to show you a graph. You'll like this. Now, Americans aren't lazy, okay? It's not as if Americans are lazy. We actually are more productive than we've been. Look at that. Look at that. Good job, America. You are more productive than you have ever been before. It's just too bad you actually haven't seen the result of your hard work. Now, why is that? That's because the money that you earned, that you worked for, your productivity, went into the pockets of someone else, to an executive, to someone to buy an extra fucking yacht. And look, this actually shows what would happen, how much you would actually be making if the minimum wages were indexed to how hard you've actually worked. Now, finally, here's another argument. Another argument that people against the minimum wage love to throw around. And that's that it will hurt small businesses. Think of the small businesses. You're going to kill these small businesses. Well, here's some facts. 2/3 of all low-wage workers actually don't work for a small business. Okay? So the people that you would primarily help don't work for small businesses. They work for large corporations. These large corporations that can afford to actually pay higher wages. New York Times article said, quote, "The evidence shows that most low-wage employees work for large corporations, which have largely recovered from the recession and have reinstituted generous pay packages for executives. Instead of a super generous pay package, how about make a less generous pay package and pay your employees for their labor, for their work, for their productivity?" You've seen the chart. Productivity, super high. But Americans are not getting paid for their productivity. Now, an example of this, Walmart. Walmart's highest paid executive raked in about $18.1 million in the last fiscal year. And instead of creating jobs, it actually used most of that money in dividends and stock buybacks. Didn't create jobs, didn't help their low-wage workers actually be able to afford to get off government assistance, because when you work for Walmart, you work for poverty wages. and you have to get on public assistance to even survive. No, instead of making sure that they weren't milking the taxpayer, they bought their own stock to inflate their stock prices. But okay, back to small business. Now, there was a survey that was done of many small businesses. And this survey showed that no, small businesses aren't actually worried about raising the minimum wage. Their primary worry was, well, it's poor sales. It's poor sales. They're not making enough money from sales. Why? Because most people don't have enough money to spend. And that's really the big problem. Now, this poll was actually done by the National Federation of Independent Businesses. And these small business owners, like I said, they cite low sales revenue as their main economic concern, not the minimum wage. Wage costs are a minor consideration, even through the Great Recession. And the study actually concludes that the real concern among small businesses is not that their low-wage workers earn too much, but that their customers don't earn enough to shop there. And look, small businesses actually have to charge more. It's not like they can go to China and get Chinese crap and import it and sell it at really low prices like Walmart can. No, they actually have to charge more for their goods because they're a local store. Now, if people actually made more money from their jobs, they could shop at these small businesses and actually support their communities instead of the Walton family. And these people wouldn't have to rely on Walmart. See, that's the genius of the Walmart strategy. You drive down wages so low, and then, well, golly gee, I'm going to have really cheap shit at my store so that you are forced to come back with your poverty wages and spend them all here. It's a genius business model. But it's exploitive as hell. And that's the main issue with it. The other issue is, of course, the issue of corporate welfare and welfare itself. Walmart's one of the biggest welfare queens in the United States, almost as much as the banks. Like I said before, a lot of people who work at Walmart have to get on government assistance. If you boost the minimum wage, make it higher so that people can actually afford to live on their own working there, because no one working full-time should be in poverty. No one. If you actually boost the minimum wage to a living wage, then that will reduce dependency on government systems. You see a lot of people bitching about welfare. Well, I know how to end it. You raise the minimum wage. It's not hard. It's not rocket science. It's just simple economics. So don't be fooled by the propaganda from those that actually benefit from driving wages low and keeping them there, because they have an incentive to keep those low wages down. Why? Because they make money. They can buy an extra yacht. They can influence a politician. They can buy back their own stock and artificially inflate their own stock prices. No. Don't listen to the propaganda. It's time to fight back. It's time to raise the minimum wage. All right. I'm going to take one quick break, and then we're going to come back. We're going to get our last segment in there, and then we're going to call it a day. All right. Back and around the nation. I just want to thank the people hanging out in the chat room. Mars, Dan Spearin from Truth Mashup. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for chatting. It's always nice to see people enjoying the show. And yes, I will definitely promise not to come out and wear a lizard man mask, even though I thought about it. Thought about wearing maybe a mask, maybe some funny hats, but no, I'm not going to do that. Not going to do that. But I'm feeling just a little bit less angry now, now that I got some of that stuff out. And we're actually going to lighten it up just a little bit for our final story. So anyway, shout out to Truth Mashup. And Mars, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. And on to our final story today. Like I said, kind of a little bit of fun. And actually, sort of good news. But I'm going to still tear into this guy just a little bit. So Jimmy LaSalvia, who's actually a founder of the conservative gay advocacy group named Go Proud, has actually decided that he's going to quit the Republican Party. No, relax, he's not a liberal, and he's actually not going over to the liberal side. He actually said, quote, "Today I joined the ranks of unaffiliated voters, but I'm every bit as conservative as I've always been. But I just can't bring myself to carry the Republican label any longer. You see, I just don't agree with the big government conservatives who run the party now." Oh, for Christ's sakes. To be fair, he also said that the GOP has a, quote, tolerance of bigotry, and that's also one of the reasons that he is now unaffiliated. Now, he said, quote, about this, the current leadership lacks the courage to stand up to it. I'm not sure they ever will. Well, no shit. They've pretty much built up their party platform into denying gay people rights. The same rights that you and I and heterosexual people enjoy. In fact, so many people that are actually part of the conservative movement think that allowing you to marry, Jimmy, will lead to dog fucking. Remember, Rick Santorum, Google it. But I wouldn't Google Santorum itself because, well, let's not get into that. But the GOP establishment and the current Republican Party hates you. And look, there's nothing wrong with being an actual fiscal conservative and, well, other than, of course, that your theories make no sense and your economics make no sense, but I digress. There's nothing wrong with saying that you're a conservative and being gay. In fact, there's nothing wrong with being gay. But it's good to see that this guy's like, yeah, you know what? I'm tired of being part of a party that hates me, that thinks that my very existence is somehow just going to destroy America. It's good to see he's got a little bit of common sense. A little bit. Now, he said that he had actually been trying to create an atmosphere on the right where conservatives could openly support gay marriage, or at least support gay Americans themselves. Well, that apparently has not worked very well, because gay people are continuously being denied rights by conservatives, denied the right to marry, denied equal status. Remember, there's a lot of states where you can still get fired for being gay. He's got a long, long road if he actually wants to foster tolerance on the right. But you're not going to do that. You're not going to do that when you have this crazy social conservative movement led by the likes of Michelle Bachmann and Rick Santorum and all these crazy nutbags on the right that to believe that their Bible counts more than the Constitution. But hey, at least he made one significant step. And, you know, I'm not really saying that if you're gay that you have to be liberal. Not saying that at all. You can be gay and love tax cuts and deregulation and be greedy. But until the conservative movement actually decides that, hey, gay people are human too, who knew? I think we're going to see a lot more gay Republicans, gay conservatives, drop the Republican label and go, hey, you know what? I can't be in a party that hates me. So, and there you go. That's all I got for you today. Thank you guys for watching Around the Nation here on TYT Nation. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff's Politics, and you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/TYT Nation. You can also support us by going to our Patreon page, joining our campaign, supporting the show with a monthly donation, $1, $3, $5, $10, whatever you'd like to donate. Really helps out, helps the show. We've got 2 patrons right now. We'd like to get to 50 by the end of the year. Kind of a big goal, but it will help us be self-sufficient. So it will really help out. And I want to thank you guys once again for watching. Make sure to tune in tomorrow when I lead the panel on TYT Community. Tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Eastern, here on YouTube's Google Plus Hangouts. Make sure to join. Make sure to watch us. And if you want to be part of the panel, email me, jeffw@tytnetwork.com. Send me a tweet. Send me a post on Facebook. We'd love to have you. Other than that, you guys have a great night, and we will see you tomorrow. Bye.